So we're going to take a little quiz this morning. So I'm going to say a statement, and if it's true for you, I want you to raise your hand, all right? So here's the first one. I've cut through a gas station to avoid a red light. I'm not just demonstrating. I've actually done this one before. Here's the next one. I don't like to take vacations where there isn't always something to do. Anyone like that? There's got to be stuff to do on vacation. Here's a third one. I frequently look at my phone for no apparent reason. Yeah, I do that a lot. I'm just glancing at stuff. Here's the last one. People who move slowly irritate me, especially people who drive slowly. Yes, some of you shot your hand. You quickly, like, I'm getting my hand up. Right? Especially when it's like the speed limit's 45 and somebody's going about 25. You think, come on, where are we going? Look, come on. Here's another one. I often switch lines because the one I'm in is too slow. Grocery store, anybody? Next, I believe whatever line I'm in, God makes the slowest. That have at Kroger, switch lines, and you realize that line's faster. But here's another one. When I go to sleep, I think about all the things I didn't do and have to do tomorrow. Anybody on that one? I don't have time for things like paying bills or seeing the doctor. This is where you put your hand up. You know, if your doctor's in the room, they're like, that's why you haven't been in for your checkup. Okay. I leave events early to avoid traffic in the parking lot. You want to do that? Maybe not, in Campbellsville it doesn't happen as much, but sometimes, you go to a big city, go to a concert, and you're thinking, do we really need to stay for the last psalm? Do we really need to be here for the fourth quarter? We can go, right? And here's the last one. I only go home to sleep. Anybody that kind of busy? You're just like, when I go home, it's because it's bedtime. Like, we just ain't got time for much else. So, a lot of us at times will find that we are just tired, right? We're just flat out tired. We're exhausted. The American Psychological Association, they did a survey and found that 50% of workers in America would say they are currently experiencing burnout. And burnout is this kind of exhaustion or tiredness where things that you usually enjoy, you don't enjoy anymore. You kind of find a lack of purpose to your work. It's not just I could use a nap or I could use a little extra weekend. It's just this exhaustion that just does not go away. Doesn't go away. So if, half of people say they're struggling with burnout, that's a lot of people. And that means it's pretty common, and we've just seen this. And exhaustion and burnout and being tired, it's kind of this catch-22. Because you get tired, you get exhausted, maybe you get a little behind, so you think, okay, well, if I just work a lot harder, I can get caught back up again, and then I can finally take a break. But then you work harder, which makes you more tired and more exhausted, and the more tired you get, the less efficient you are at working, and maybe you make some mistakes, and so you have to work longer than you did, which makes you more tired, and then you really need a nap, and you're thinking, well, I'll just get a nap when the season's over, but the season just never ends, and you're still exhausted. And it just kind of keeps going and going and going. Or I don't know if you've ever noticed this, where you go on vacation, and then you feel like you needed a vacation from your vacation, right? Like you get home, and you're like, I'm still tired. What's going on? So for a lot of us, we're just exhausted. And as we've been going through this series in the Psalms about our emotions, we've talked about joy and shame and sadness and anger. And this morning we're going to talk about being tired. And that at first might not really seem like an emotion, like tired. That seems a little bit different. But being tired actually affects all your other emotions. Because when you're tired, it's easier to get angry. It's easier to feel lonely. It's easier to get depressed. It just wears you out in such a way that everything else becomes more of a struggle. And David writes about a kind of a different sort of way that we can live when we are tired. So if you want to turn to Psalm chapter 23. Psalm chapter 23. And David begins in this psalm, as Taylor read for us just a little bit ago. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. I lack nothing. And that's a really hard statement for us to believe, because most of us could pretty quickly think of some things that we're lacking, right? Like And sometimes even if you're not sure what you're lacking, you can figure it out, And sometimes it's almost like if there was only, I don't know, like a list out there. If there was just something we could like scroll through that would remind you of all the things you lack. Like you could see what everybody else has and what everybody else is doing. Maybe like an app on your phone, and there's just pictures and of what everybody else is doing, what they got for Christmas, their vacations, the new car they bought, and then you go, oh yeah, that's what I'm lacking. Thank you, I forgot, but now I see you doing it. If only we had something like that. Because, you lack things like owning a house or having a bigger house. You lack a spouse. You lack a child. You lack a grandchild. You lack a new car. You lack the latest iPhone. You lack a high school sports record or a state title. You lack flawless skin, or you lack the photo editing ability to make it look like you have flawless skin on that app we talked about. Just no matter what it is, we always find something that we lack. Like if only I just had this. If I could just get that. But David, he writes that, well, the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. Nothing I need. Nothing else I want. I'm good. And that Hebrew word for lack shows up a few different times in Scripture. Probably one of the most significant ones is in Exodus chapter 16, where God gives the people manna. Israel's wandering through the desert. They have no food, and so God says, well, every morning you're going to wake up, and there's going to be this stuff on the ground, and that's food for you. And manna literally means, what is it? But in Exodus 16, it says that the people, every day they went up, and they got the amount of manna they needed, and no one had any lack. Everybody had what they needed. Everybody had just enough. So David begins by saying, well, when the Lord's in control, I'm good. I've got everything I need. I'm taken care of. I'm set. But then he goes on. He says, the Lord is my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Now notice he says, he makes me lie down, not he asks you to lie down. He doesn't invite you. He says, hey, don't you think it'd be a great idea right now if you lie down? Hey, you want to come over this evening and just kind of lie down on the couch? No, he says, get on the couch. He makes me lie down. And the irony is, when it comes to like trying to take a break and rest, that if you don't do it, actually your illness will be your rest. I've kind of noticed that in my life at times when I just feel like, man, I just really need a little downtime. I need to slow down. Guess what happens? I get sick. I get the flu. I get some bug, and then I have to call Rodney, hey, I got to take today off. I don't feel good. That tends to happen. Wayne Mueller, he wrote a book all about the Sabbath, and he put it this way. He literally just said, if we do not allow for a rhythm of rest in our overly busy lives, illness becomes our Sabbath. So he wrote that about just what we go through. And what's incredible is God gives us this gift of Sabbath. And when God gives Sabbath to the people, the idea is one day out of every 7, you take a whole day off. And God gives all kinds of parameters in the Old Testament for how that is supposed to work. And what they're not supposed to do and they're supposed to do. But for one whole day, they're just supposed to rest. Now, what's really interesting is the 10 Commandments show up twice in your Bible, twice in the Old Testament. Once in Exodus 20 and again in Deuteronomy 5. And both times, God explains a different reason why he gave us Sabbath. In Exodus 20, the reason that God gives is he says, well, I made the world in 6 days, and on the 7th day I rested. So if I rested, you should too. So God says he built and designed the world so that we could get a break. We could have a Sabbath rest. But then in Deuteronomy 5, God gives another reason. He says, I'm the God who brought you up out of Egypt, so you better take a Sabbath. Meaning, in Egypt, when they were slaves, there were no days off. There were no benefits, there were no vacation times, nothing like that. They were slaves. So when the sun's up, you're at work. And when it's too dark to work, all right, I guess you can go home, but be back here tomorrow. There's no rest. There's no breaks. There's no any of that. And God says very clearly, I'm not going to be that kind of a God. I'm not going to be like what you experienced in Egypt. You're not slaves. So I'm going to give you time off, something the Egyptians never gave you. And so God builds this rhythm of Sabbath into the way the world works, into the way things are created. So we get this rhythm that he creates us in because he's not a slave driver. And he also wants us to not become slaves. Because a lot of times we become so tired and exhausted because we've let something else become our slave driver. And we feel like, because again, we go back to, well, I'm lacking something. So maybe if I just work hard enough, then I'll get what I need. Maybe if I just put in longer hours, or maybe if I just do this, or just do that, or work on this project, maybe I can finally have the status that I feel like I lack. I can have whatever it is I don't feel like I have. And then we get tired. And so in many ways, God gives us the Sabbath to protect us from ourselves so that we won't just keep working and working and working and working. But he'll give us some time to rest. And so that's why David writes, the Lord is my shepherd. He's not just a shepherd, he's my shepherd. He knows what's best for me. But that also means if the Lord is his shepherd, that makes David a sheep. He doesn't get to be in charge. He has to listen to what the shepherd tells him to do. But that also means it's not the sheep's job to find the green pastures and the still quiet waters. That's the shepherd's job. David just follows. He just goes where he's told to go. That's what he's supposed to do. And so much of the time we feel like it's all on us. It's our responsibility. It's our job. We have to find the green pastures. We have to find those quiet waters. We have to find those places where we have to work so hard to make sure we have what we need and what we want. And David says, no. We're the sheep. That's not our job. That's his job. He takes care of that. And so God gives us this really easy way to help with that. He says, well, why don't you take a Sabbath? And maybe, you've probably heard that growing up, if you've grown up in church a lot of times, about taking a day off. But it's not just good for those reasons. It's also good because that's why God created it. He created it to help us out. Now, here's what you do when you take a Sabbath if you've never done it. It just means out of every 7 days, you take one day off. Work for 6 days, take one day off. And maybe growing up you heard the Sabbath is Sunday. Well, it doesn't have to be Sunday. It could be any day. It can be any day of the week that works for you. Because sometimes, I don't know if maybe you've seen this, someone's out on a Sunday and they're mowing their grass and you're thinking, it's the Sabbath. Why are you mowing your yard on the Sabbath? Well, because for that person, Sunday is the only day they could mow their yard. But the Sabbath doesn't have to be Sunday. It can be any day. And once I heard some pretty good advice about the Sabbath. Somebody once said, if you work with your hands, Sabbath with your mind. If you work with your mind, Sabbath with your hands. And I've noticed that's been helpful for me because I have the type of job where a lot of my work is with my mind. So, like when I take time off, I don't necessarily want to read another book because I do a lot of reading during the week. I do a lot of writing. That's not really what I want to do. And so oddly enough, I don't mind a few hours of a painting project on the weekend or some kind of putting together furniture or something. I don't mind that because I spend all day in front of a lot of my time working with people and talking and writing and thinking and reading. So I just need some time to do something a little bit different. Maybe that's helpful for you. Back when I worked in the preaching department at Southeast up in Louisville, Kyle Eidelman told me this really funny story about one of his previous interns, not me, previous intern, back in 2003, 2004. And his intern back then bought a brand new Mazda 3. Bought it brand new, real excited, first new car that this person had, and drove it around, really enjoyed it. But if you fast forward to the end of 2004, that Mazda 3 was a wreck. It was ruined. You want to know what that intern forgot to do? Get an oil change. I don't know why. I don't know who this person is. He remains nameless. But I don't know if just no one ever taught him about car maintenance or he didn't realize you need to go get an oil change every once in a while. I don't know what happened. I don't know if he was so busy that he just never had time to do it. But what ended up happening is at the end of the year, he had to spend $6,500 to replace the engine in his brand new Mazda 3. Now, an oil change, now I get it, depending on what kind of oil you want to use, it's about $40, maybe a little more if you use a higher grade of motor oil. But I don't know, 3-4 times a year, depending on how much you drive, you change the oil in your car. It takes about 10 minutes, about $40. So he could have spent maybe about 30 minutes and around $120 that year taking care of his Mazda 3. But instead, he spent $6,500 and who knows how long in the shop getting that engine replaced. And here's the point, is you can rest along the way for a little bit, or you can have a burnout and need some serious kind of rest. Either way, you're going to get it, because God knows that's what we need. And a lot of times what happens with those who experience burnout is they get to this place where it takes months to recoup. It takes counseling sessions. It's not just hey, let me just take a week off and go rest up. Now, it's months and months of counseling and sleeping and doctor's appointments and trying to get back into the swing of things. It's really difficult. But God knows we need this Sabbath, because we're a lot like that Mazda 3. Every once in a while, we need a break. We need a little bit of a rest and a refresh. Then David continues in the psalm. He says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, your translation might read, or you might be used to a translation that says, even though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death. And in Hebrew, that little phrase right there, it's literally like deepest darkness, dark darkness. And so it's this idea of it's as dark as you can get. And some of you, you're walking around right now in the deepest darkness. And life is very difficult. Life is exhausting because you're just never quite sure where the next hit's going to come from, where the next challenge will happen. You're just not sure what to expect. I remember the first time I took one of those guided cave tours with my family, probably in elementary school, and we were in Missouri somewhere on this trip, and went through the cave tour, and it was the very first time that I'd been on a tour where, if you've been in caves, you know they do this. They take you somewhere in the middle of the cave, and then they say, okay, we're going to turn out all the lights now. And I remember being, third grader, second grade, something like that, thinking, I've been in the dark. Like, how much darker can dark get? Thinking, whatever, dude. And so he's trying to warn us now, you might get dizzy, don't move, I'm like, yeah, whatever. And he turns off the lights. I'm like, oh, that's what he meant. Because if you've ever done that, it's like your eyes feel funny, because it's like they're straining for any light and they can't find any. And you're putting your hand in front of your face, but you can't see your hand, and your brain knows your hand should be there, but your eyes can't confirm it. And then you start to feel really dizzy because you're like, well, I know I'm standing on something solid, but I can't see it. What's going on? And you don't know how far away everybody is. It gets kind of weird. It gets disorienting. And when you're in the darkest darkness, when you're in that kind of a valley, that's what it's like. You kind of get disoriented. You just get exhausted of just trying to figure out where to go. Things that you used to be certain of, you're not so certain of anymore. And it takes a lot of energy, and it gets exhausting. It gets disoriented. But what does David say? He says, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me. In that darkness, it may be hard to see, but Jesus is still there. He's still being your shepherd. He's still there with you. And I think it's kind of funny that David writes, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Because you know what a shepherd uses a rod and a staff for? Hitting things. Like a shepherd uses that to fight off wild animals, or if the sheep are being a little stubborn and they're not going the right way, kind of hits them back into line, Like that comforts you? Well, yeah, because when you're in the deepest darkness, you don't exactly know, which way do I go? And so God can just kind of take his staff and, no, that way. No, that way. Hold, stop. That's a cliff. Let's stop right here. He can do that. And so David is comforted because he knows you're here to take care of me. You're going to fight off the evil that is here that I can't see, and you're going to guide me the right way. You're going to remind, hey, no, let's go this way. Don't go this way. Go a little faster. Stop. He knows what to do, and he's going to guide us. He's going to, sometimes gently, sometimes he's got to nudge us a little bit. No. Don't do that. But he knows that he continues to help to move us. And so the Lord is our shepherd. We lack nothing. Even when we can't see, he's taking care of us. He's guiding us. He's moving us along the way. So when we are exhausted, remember we've been talking about how emotions can move us one way or the other. And when you're exhausted, that feeling can move you a couple of different ways. One way is it can move you to just try to work even harder. And say, well, if I just work more, I can get out of this. I can get through this myself. Or if I work harder, I can get what I need. I can meet my needs myself. You can kind of become self-absorbed or even more exhausted. Or your exhaustion can move you to recognize the Lord is my shepherd. And that means we take the pressure off of ourselves and we give it to God. We let him take care of us. We remember what our job is and what his job is. We're the sheep, he's the shepherd. We let him lead us. And when David ends this psalm, he ends knowing that God's going to take care of him. He's going to lead him through this valley and get him through to the other side. He's going to be able to make it safely. And there's a number of people that God takes care of in the Bible this way, by setting a table for them, by feeding them. With the prophet Elijah in particular, we see this. Elijah has to hide out in the desert. There's been a famine in the land. There's been no rain. But what God does for Elijah is he hides him near this little brook with just enough water to take care of Elijah. And every day God sends ravens carrying food to take care of him. And later, Elijah has a really difficult season of ministry, and he becomes depressed. And he's out in the wilderness, and he says, God, just take my life. And so what does God do? He sends an angel, and he says, hey, take a nap. And while he's napping, the angel cooks some food, feeds him, and then says, hey, take another nap. Sometimes God knows what you really need is you need to rest. Just rest. One of my professors in Bible college, he would say this quite a bit to us. He would say, sometimes the holiest thing you can do is take a nap. He usually would say that when he was teaching or preaching about Jesus napping in the middle of a storm. It's like if the Son of God can nap during the middle of a thunderstorm, you can rest. It's okay. And God's going to take care of us. Because even with Jesus, after 40 days of being out in the wilderness, being tested by Satan, how does that story end? Well, God sent angels to come and take care of him. Probably bring him some food, bring him some water, get him to a safe place to rest up. Now, I don't know if David fully knew this or not when he wrote Psalm 23, but of course he's writing about Jesus. Because in John chapter 10, Jesus says about himself, he says, I am the good shepherd. I look out for my sheep. They know my voice, they know where to go. I'm the good shepherd. And in Matthew, Jesus says, come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. He goes on, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And that idea of this yoke that Jesus talks about back in his day, the yoke, that harness you would put around oxen to pull a plow, they use that as a metaphor for the type of teaching that somebody would give to you. And so the idea was, if you take Jesus' teaching on and you follow what he has to say, it's actually light. It's easy compared to all the other teachings out there. And Jesus, in a way, he is the Sabbath. A walking, moving, living, breathing Sabbath rest for God's people. Said, you really want to take a rest? Come follow me. Do what I teach you to do. Because the way Jesus teaches us to do is to live in such a way that we're not slaves to something anymore. We have this freedom that doesn't come from anywhere else. And Jesus' invitation over 2,000 years ago is still the same. He still says to us, come to me. If you're weary, all of you who are tired, come to me, take my burden on, and you will have rest. Because he's the good shepherd. His way is better than our way. He knows what we need. He knows how to provide and how to take care of us. And so for following Jesus, that's a choice for all of us to decide, do we want that kind of rest for our souls? Do we want to let Jesus be the shepherd? And do we let him guide us? And for some of us, that might mean we have to take the shepherding stick out of our own hand and give it back over to him and say, all right, lead me, Lord. Show me where to go. Let's pray. Dear Father, I thank you so much for your gift to us of rest. And thank you, Jesus, that you are the good shepherd and you offer rest to us in a deeply satisfying and fulfilling way that's just different from everywhere else in the world, that you teach us a kind of way to live where we don't have to be slaves to something else, to live in such a way that we lack nothing. And God, help to guide us when we're in those seasons of the deepest darkness, and continue to guide us and comfort us with your rod and your staff. And help us to trust that you are preparing a table for us in the presence of our enemies, that our cup will overflow, and that we will forever get to rest in your house. In your name I pray. Amen.